Cyril Jose was 16 years old when he attacked here at Ovillers with the 2nd Devons on the first day of the Battle of the Somme. He went over the top at 7:30 a.m. By 7:35 a.m. he was laying wounded in no man's land just here. But his story didn't end there, and we're going to tell that story today. So on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, Cyril Jose was here at Ovillers with the 2nd Devons, and their objective would be to attack the village of Ovillers, which is here behind me, just on the other side of the cemetery. The British frontline trench was out here behind us, literally on the ridge in the background here. This is where the frontline British trench was, and Cyril would be attacking across this open ground on the first day of the Somme. He left his trench at 7:30 a.m. Now, Cyril Jose has recorded his story since the Great War, and we're lucky to have some of that written down, and I'm going to share his account of initially going over the top right now. So here's what Cyril had to say. We went over the top at 7:30 a.m, the first wave of troops. The German infantry occupied deep dugouts and had survived the devastation wrought by our artillery. At that distance, we had no possible chance of surprising them. They simply cut us down with their rifle and machine gun fire. Their artillery had already set a barrage across no man's land. Men went down like corn before a scythe. So despite the machine gun fire and artillery against the 2nd Devons, Cyril bravely marched across no man's land in this vast open space behind me. He got nearly to the German barbed wire, just in front of the German trench, which would have been just about level with this wall on the edge of the cemetery here behind me. Let's listen to his story of what happened next. We were a sorry remnant that reached the Jerry barbed wire. A special 24-hour trench mortar bombardment on the wire entanglements had only succeeded in making a few gaps. Naturally, Jerry had his machine guns and rifles trained on these. Down went 2nd Lieutenant Gould. Across him fell his batsman, Harry Hamblin. Both were killed instantly. I jumped to clear them. A bullet thumped through my left shoulder and chest, knocking me down. I panicked and yelled, "I'm hit." So Cyril lay injured in no man's land, along with thousands of other men. Now the problem was the fighting would carry on here for hours over the next day or two, and so there wasn't an easy opportunity for Cyril to go back towards his own British line. Now, luckily, whilst he was injured, he was still able to move, so he had to lay as still as he possibly could here in no man's land, waiting for the opportunity to try and get back to the British lines. Now, this situation that Cyril was in was not unusual, and it was the problem here on the first day of the Somme. Lots of men lay wounded and bleeding in no man's land, and then died from wounds that they maybe wouldn't have died from were they able to have received treatment earlier. Let's listen to Cyril's story again. Not until 7 a.m. on the 2nd of July, stiff and in pain, my uniform purple with blood, did I feel it safe to move. Slowly I began the long crawl back. The grass was fortunately long. It seemed that I was alone in a field of dead men. So 24 hours Cyril lay right here in no man's land behind us, waiting for his opportunity to crawl back across this open land towards the British frontline trench. As he mentioned, the grass here was longer at the time, and so very slowly he began to crawl inch by inch back across no man's land. You can imagine the carnage that he was crawling back through, his friends lying dead around him. But as he started to get through his journey, he did bump into one of his wounded colleagues who was not killed. I encountered Private Lammercraft, a hardened regular soldier, 35 years old. He was wounded in the back and legs. We struggled along together, with my right arm under his body, whilst he tried to walk on his hands, wheelbarrow style. It felt like in an hour we'd made little progress. We were both too weak from loss of blood. So at this point, the men decided the only opportunity for them to survive would be for Cyril to push on alone. Before he left, though, he collected water bottles, canteens from other dead soldiers lying in no man's land, bravely trying to get them back to his friend Lammy so that he would at least have the best opportunity to survive in no man's land. That wasn't an easy task. Cyril at the time was getting sniped at by the German soldiers, machine gun fire, who had seen him and other wounded men still crawling around in the devastation here. There was no man's land. But Cyril pushed on back towards the British front line and eventually managed to get there. He flung himself into the British front line trench, straight away told them about his friend Lammy, who was still lying out here in no man's land. But at the time it was too dangerous for anyone to attempt to try to get him. Private Lammercraft would actually lay for a further 3 days in no man's land. But he survived and he was rescued 3 days later. No doubt thanks to the brave efforts of Cyril to make sure he had water and everything he needed to survive that time out here in no man's land. Despite the wounds that Cyril suffered here on the first day of the Battle of the Somme, he survived. He would return to the front line after spending time in hospital in 1917 and would fight through the rest of the war. But he returned home to the West Country, where he married a lady called Dorothy. He went on to have 2 children. By the time he died in 1984, he was 84 years old. He had 2 children, 4 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. Now, of course, not all of the men from the 2nd Devons were as lucky as Cyril, and a lot of them were killed here and still lay here today. For example, W.H. Strawbridge of the Devonshire Regiment, killed here 1st of July 1916, aged 21 years old. There's many men of the Devonshire Regiment here in the Ovillers military cemetery. A lot of those are unknown soldiers, so there are graves here from the Devonshire Regiment but marked as unknown soldiers, so probably from where they recovered the bodies from. They knew where certain units had attacked from, so they knew they would have been a member of the Devonshires, but unfortunately they weren't able to identify them. Now there's other men here who are named again, so for example we have here F.T. Oden, I hope I pronounced that correctly, the Devonshire Regiment, killed here 1st of July 1916, 20 years old.